In a small-town courtroom, where the hum of anticipation filled the air, a moment unfolded that would leave everyone present speechless. A black woman, standing tall with quiet dignity, was ordered to kneel before the judge, a command that struck like a thunderbolt, silencing the room. What happened next defied every expectation, unraveling a chain of events that exposed hidden truths, challenged deep-seated biases, and reshaped the course of justice in ways no one could have predicted. Her name was Aisha Thompson, a 34-year-old community organizer known for her tireless work advocating for equity in her town of Willow Creek. Aisha had always been a figure of strength, someone who spoke with conviction and carried herself with grace. On that sweltering July morning in 2024, she found herself at the center of a legal storm that had been brewing for months. The case stemmed from a protest she had organized, a peaceful demonstration against a proposed ordinance that would limit access to public spaces for certain community groups. The protest had drawn hundreds, and while it remained nonviolent, the town's leadership saw it as a threat to their authority. Aisha was charged with inciting a public disturbance, a vague accusation that carried the weight of the town's unspoken resentment toward her activism. The courtroom was packed that day. Supporters, skeptics, and reporters filled the benches, their eyes fixed on Aisha as she stood before Judge Harold Grayson, a man known for his stern demeanor and rigid adherence to procedure. Grayson had presided over Willow Creek's court for nearly 2 decades, and his reputation for maintaining order was unshakable. To many, he represented the town's old guard, a symbol of tradition in a community grappling with change. Aisha, in contrast, was a beacon of progress, a black woman who refused to bow to the pressures of a system that often sought to silence her. As the hearing began, the prosecutor laid out the case against Aisha. He painted her as a troublemaker, someone who had deliberately stirred unrest to undermine the town's peace. His words were sharp, laced with insinuations about her character, her motives, and her place in a town that had long prided itself on its homogeneity. Aisha listened calmly, her hands clasped in front of her, her eyes steady. Her attorney, a young public defender named Marcus Reed, countered with evidence of the protest's peaceful nature, videos, witness statements, and permits that had been filed well in advance. But the prosecutor's narrative seemed to resonate with the judge, whose expression remained unreadable. Then came the moment that would ignite the courtroom. Judge Grayson, his voice low and commanding, interrupted Marcus mid-sentence. He turned his gaze to Aisha, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Ms. Thompson," he said, his tone carrying an edge that made the room go still, "you will show respect for this court. Kneel." The word hung in the air, heavy and jarring. Aisha's face registered a flicker of disbelief, but she did not move. The command was not a standard courtroom protocol. It was an assertion of power, a demand that seemed to carry the weight of something far deeper than legal procedure. The spectators shifted uncomfortably, their whispers barely audible. Marcus, caught off guard, began to object, but Grayson raised a hand to silence him. "I will not repeat myself," the judge said. "Kneel, or you will be held in contempt." Aisha's heart pounded, but her resolve held firm. She stood straighter, her voice clear and unwavering. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I will not kneel. I am here to answer for my actions, not to be humiliated." Her words were not loud, but they carried a power that seemed to ripple through the room. The spectators leaned forward, some nodding in quiet support, others exchanging shocked glances. The prosecutor smirked, as if expecting her defiance to seal her fate. Grayson's face darkened, his fingers tightening around his gavel. What happened next was nothing short of extraordinary. Aisha, still standing, began to speak, not to the judge but to the courtroom itself. Her voice was steady, deliberate, and filled with a conviction that demanded attention. She spoke of her work, her commitment to her community, and the reasons she had organized the protest. She recounted the countless times she had faced discrimination, not just in Willow Creek but throughout her life, and how those experiences had fueled her fight for justice. She spoke of the ordinance, how it would disproportionately harm marginalized groups, and how her protest was not an act of defiance but an act of love for her neighbors. As she spoke, something shifted in the room. The spectators, many of whom had come with preconceived notions about Aisha, began to listen, really listen. Her words were not rehearsed, but they were raw and honest, cutting through the tension like a blade. Even the court stenographer paused, her fingers hovering over the keys, as if unwilling to miss a single syllable. Marcus, standing beside her, watched in awe, realizing that his client was doing something far greater than defending herself. She was reclaiming her narrative. Then a voice broke the silence. It came from the back of the courtroom, where an older woman, a lifelong resident of Willow Creek, stood up. Her name was Eleanor Harris, a retired schoolteacher known for her quiet demeanor and deep ties to the town. "She's right," Eleanor said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I was at that protest. It was peaceful. It was about protecting our community, not tearing it apart. This isn't justice." Her words sent a ripple through the crowd, and soon another spectator stood, a young man who had been skeptical of Aisha's cause but was moved by her words. "She doesn't deserve this," he said. "This isn't right." One by one, others began to stand, their voices joining in a chorus of support. Some were black, some were white, some were young, some were old, but all were united in their recognition of an injustice unfolding before them. The prosecutor's face paled, and Judge Grayson's composure began to crack. He banged his gavel, demanding order, but the voices only grew louder. Aisha remained standing, her eyes meeting Grayson's, not with defiance but with a quiet strength that seemed to challenge the very foundation of his authority. In that moment, the courtroom became more than a place of judgment. It became a stage for truth. The spectator support was not just for Aisha but for something larger, a demand for fairness, for accountability, for a system that did not bend under the weight of prejudice. Grayson, visibly shaken, called for a recess, his voice barely audible over the growing murmurs. As he retreated to his chambers, Aisha remained where she was, surrounded by a crowd that now saw her not as a defendant but as a leader. The recess lasted longer than usual. Behind closed doors, Grayson faced a dilemma. The public outcry in the courtroom had been unexpected, and the presence of reporters ensured that the story would spread far beyond Willow Creek. He knew that proceeding with a contempt charge would only escalate the situation, potentially sparking protests far larger than the one Aisha had organized. Yet, to back down would mean admitting fault, something his pride resisted. When the court reconvened, Grayson's demeanor was noticeably different. He did not repeat his demand for Aisha to kneel. Instead, he addressed the courtroom with a strained attempt at neutrality. "This court will proceed with the case at hand," he said, his voice lacking its earlier authority. "The charge of contempt is withdrawn." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, but Aisha's supporters remained vigilant, their eyes fixed on the judge. Marcus seized the opportunity to present the remainder of their defense. He called witnesses who had attended the protest, each corroborating Aisha's account of its peaceful nature. He submitted documents proving that the town's ordinance had been drafted with little community input, a fact that had fueled Aisha's activism. The prosecutor's arguments, once confident, began to falter under the weight of the evidence and the courtroom's shifting mood. As the hearing drew to a close, Grayson delivered his ruling. The charges against Aisha were dismissed, a decision that prompted cheers from the spectators. But Aisha did not celebrate. Instead, she turned to the crowd and spoke once more, her voice steady but urgent. "This isn't just about me," she said. "This is about all of us. We have to keep fighting, keep speaking, keep standing, because justice doesn't come from one courtroom or one case. It comes from us together." Her words lingered in the air, a call to action that resonated far beyond the walls of the courtroom. In the days that followed, the story of Aisha Thompson spread across the country. News outlets reported on the black woman who had been ordered to kneel and refused, sparking a national conversation about power, race, and justice. Activists rallied around her, and the ordinance that had sparked the protest was quietly withdrawn by the town council, a small but significant victory. But for Aisha, the fight was far from over. She returned to her work with renewed purpose, organizing workshops, speaking at community events, and mentoring young activists. The courtroom moment had changed her, not because it had broken her but because it had shown her the power of collective action. She had stood alone at first, but she had not been alone for long. In Willow Creek, the ripple effects continued. Eleanor Harris, the retired schoolteacher, began volunteering with Aisha's organization, using her influence to bridge divides in the community. The young man who had stood in support launched a petition to reform the town's judicial processes, gathering thousands of signatures. Even Judge Grayson, in the privacy of his chambers, was forced to confront the weight of his actions, though he never publicly admitted fault. The story of that day in the courtroom became a turning point, not just for Aisha but for Willow Creek and beyond. It was a reminder that justice is not a gift bestowed by those in power. It is a demand, a struggle, a collective cry that can shake even the most rigid institutions. Aisha Thompson, the black woman who refused to kneel, had not only shocked the courtroom but had ignited a spark that would burn brightly for years to come.